Michael Davidson stared at the notification on his phone, his coffee growing cold beside the laptop where he'd been reviewing quarterly reports. The message was simple enough: a credit card decline alert from his joint account with Sarah. What made his hand tremble wasn't the decline transaction, but the location: Marigold Jewelers in Tampa, over 1,000 miles from their Chicago home. Sarah was supposed to be at her mother's in Milwaukee. At least, that's what she'd told him 3 days ago when she'd kissed him goodbye, rolling her overnight bag across their driveway with that familiar apologetic smile. "Mom's having one of her episodes again," she'd said. "I'll be back before your board meeting on Friday." The January wind howled outside his home office window, rattling the panes in a way that suddenly felt ominous. 23 years of marriage had taught Michael to trust his instincts, and right now, every nerve in his body was screaming that something was terribly wrong. He reached for his phone again, scrolling through recent calls. Sarah hadn't answered his last 2 attempts to reach her, but that wasn't unusual when she was dealing with her mother. Caroline's declining mental health often demanded Sarah's undivided attention. Or at least, that's what he'd always believed. "Hey, Tom," he spoke into the phone after dialing his best friend's number. "Remember that favor you owe me? I need you to run a plate." The words felt foreign in his mouth. In his 30 years as a financial advisor, he'd never had to ask his detective friend for anything like this. Tom's response was immediate. "Mike, you sure about this? Sarah's car. I need to know." The silence on the other end stretched for what felt like hours before Tom cleared his throat. "Give me an hour." Michael spent that hour trying to focus on work, but his mind kept drifting to all the small changes he'd noticed over the past few months. Sarah's new yoga classes that always ran late. The mysterious text messages that made her smile in a way he hadn't seen in years. The sudden interest in updating her wardrobe. He'd attributed it all to her finally emerging from the depression that had plagued her since their son Jason's death 3 years ago. Jason. The thought of their boy sent a familiar ache through his chest. The drunk driver who'd taken their only child had shattered their world, but Michael had believed they were finally healing. Together. His phone buzzed. Tom's message was brief: "Car spotted at Tampa International Airport, long-term parking. Arrived Monday." Monday. The same day Sarah had left for Milwaukee. With trembling fingers, Michael opened his banking app. The joint account's transaction history painted a picture he couldn't ignore: flights, hotel charges, restaurants for 2. All in Tampa. All while he'd been here, believing the woman he'd loved for more than 2 decades was caring for her elderly mother. A new email notification popped up on his screen. The sender's name made his blood run cold: James Martinez, their corporate lawyer. The subject line was even worse: urgent, unauthorized wire transfers detected. Michael's vision blurred as he opened the email. The words seemed to float off the screen: suspicious activity, multiple transfers, offshore accounts, total amount, $2.4 million. He reached for his coffee cup with a shaking hand, knocking it over. Dark liquid spread across his desk, seeping into important documents, but he couldn't bring himself to care. The final line of James's email echoed in his mind: all transfers authorized by Sarah Davidson. The sound of his office door opening made him look up. Linda, his assistant of 15 years, stood there with concern etched on her face. "Mr. Davidson? The police are here. They say it's urgent." Behind her, he could see 2 serious-faced detectives in the hallway. One of them held up a badge. "Mr. Davidson. We need to talk about your wife's involvement in a series of investment frauds across 3 states." Michael felt the room spin. The life he'd thought he knew, the marriage he'd believed in, the trust he'd never questioned, it was all unraveling like a poorly knitted sweater, leaving him exposed to a cold reality he never saw coming. His phone buzzed one final time. A text from Sarah: "I'm sorry, Michael. I never meant for it to go this far. But you have to understand, after Jason, nothing was ever going to be the same. The police interview room felt smaller with each passing hour. Michael sat there, his collar damp with sweat, as Detective Rachel Chen spread photographs across the metal table. Each image told a story he couldn't comprehend: Sarah at different banks, Sarah with an unknown man, Sarah looking nothing like the grieving mother she'd been at home. "Your wife has been busy, Mr. Davidson," Detective Chen said, her voice gentle but firm. "These photos span the last 18 months. We believe she's been working with Marcus Blackwood, a known financial fraudster. He specializes in targeting grieving families." The name hit Michael like a physical blow. Marcus Blackwood, he repeated, the words ashen in his mouth. He was in Jason's grief support group. He lost his daughter in a car accident too. The memory surfaced, Marcus, shoulders hunched with grief, sharing stories about his daughter Emily. Sarah had connected with him immediately, finding solace in their shared loss. "Mr. Blackwood's daughter Emily never existed," Detective Chen said quietly. "He creates these personas to gain trust. Your wife isn't his first partner, but she's certainly been his most successful." Michael's hands trembled as he reached for the water glass before him. "The money, the 2.4 million. Where did it come from?" Detective Chen's expression softened. "That's why we're here, Mr. Davidson. The money came from your clients' accounts. Vulnerable people, many of them elderly, who trusted your firm with their life savings." The room spun. Michael thought of Mrs. Peterson, a widow who'd entrusted him with her husband's pension. Mr. Chen, who'd been saving for his granddaughter's college fund. Faces, names, trust, all betrayed. "We've frozen your personal assets," Detective Chen continued. "But we need your help tracking down where the money went. Your wife and Blackwood have engineered quite a sophisticated operation." A knock at the door interrupted them. Tom entered, his detective's badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. His face carried the weight of more bad news. "Mike," he said, "we found something at your house. You need to see this." The drive home was silent. Police cars still lined his street, their lights painting his neighbors' curious faces in rotating red and blue. Inside his house, Tom led him to Jason's old room, the shrine to their son that neither he nor Sarah had been able to pack away. "In the closet," Tom directed. Michael's legs felt leaden as he approached. The closet door creaked open to reveal Jason's old sports equipment, school projects, and the box. A simple cardboard box he'd never seen before, tucked behind his son's baseball trophies. Inside, he found stacks of papers, insurance documents, medical records, police reports, all about Jason's accident. But these weren't copies of the ones they'd received. These were different, altered, showing impossible discrepancies. The drunk driver who killed Jason, Tom said heavily, wasn't drunk. The blood alcohol reports were falsified. The witness statements were altered. "Mike. Jason's death wasn't an accident. It was staged." Michael sank to the floor, the box spilling its contents around him. Among the papers, a photo fluttered out, Sarah and Marcus Blackwood, smiling at a beach somewhere. The date stamp showed 3 weeks before Jason's death. "Why?" The question escaped him in a broken whisper. "Life insurance," Tom replied. 3 policies, taken out 2 months before Jason's death. Total payout, $5 million. The money was transferred to offshore accounts shortly after the funeral. Michael's world tilted on its axis. The grief they'd shared, the nights he'd held Sarah as she cried, the therapy sessions where they'd talked about healing together, all of it had been a lie. Their son's death, the pivotal tragedy that had defined their lives for the past 3 years, had been orchestrated by the woman he'd loved for over 2 decades. His phone lit up with a new message. "Sarah again, I know they're telling you everything. But they don't understand. Jason wasn't supposed to be in that car. It was meant to be you, Michael. It was always supposed to be you." The truth hit him with the force of a tsunami. The carefully constructed facade of his life wasn't just crumbling, it was being obliterated, revealing a horror he could never have imagined. And somewhere in Tampa, the architect of this nightmare was still free, still moving pieces on a board he hadn't even known he was playing on. Detective Chen's voice came from the doorway, urgent and tense. "Mr. Davidson, we just got a report. Your wife's credit card was just used to purchase another plane ticket. She's not running away. She's coming back to Chicago." The dawn found Michael sitting in Jason's room, surrounded by the scattered evidence of his shattered life. He'd spent the night reading every document, examining every photo, trying to pinpoint the moment his wife had transformed from the woman he loved into someone capable of orchestrating their son's death. In his hands, he held Jason's last school photo. His son's smile, so much like Sarah's, now felt like a cruel joke. He remembered the morning it was taken, how Jason had complained about wearing a tie, how Sarah had insisted it would make him look grown up. Had she known then? Had she already been planning his death while adjusting their son's collar? "Mike." Tom's voice came from the doorway. He'd stayed through the night, making calls, coordinating with Detective Chen, refusing to leave his friend alone with the weight of these revelations. "We found something in Sarah's old emails. You need to see this." The laptop screen showed an email chain between Sarah and Marcus Blackwood, dating back 4 years. Before Jason's death. Before the grief support group. Before everything. "My husband suspects nothing," one email read. "He's too busy with his precious clients to notice. Just like you said, his trust is his weakness. But are you sure about the boy? There must be another way." Marcus's reply was clinical: "The insurance won't pay without a death. Your son is the key to everything. Remember what we discussed, this is about more than money. This is about justice." "Justice?" Michael whispered, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "What justice could possibly require killing our son?" Tom sat heavily in Jason's old desk chair. "We did more digging into Marcus Blackwood's background. His real name is Marcus Cohen. 25 years ago, your firm handled his father's investments." The name hit Michael like a physical blow. "Robert Cohen? But that was my first year as an advisor. His account was mishandled by my mentor. We lost everything. The firm made changes after that, implemented new safeguards. Robert Cohen committed suicide 3 months after losing his fortune," Tom said quietly. "Marcus was 17. He spent the next 2 decades building an identity, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And then he met Sarah." Michael's mind raced back through the years. He remembered Sarah's gradual withdrawal, the subtle changes in her behavior. How she'd started asking questions about his clients, showing sudden interest in his work. He'd been flattered, thinking she was finally taking pride in his success. "There's more," Tom continued. "Sarah's background, it's not what you think. The woman you married 23 years ago. She doesn't exist." Michael's head snapped up. "What?" Tom slid a file across the desk. Inside were 2 birth certificates, 2 sets of school records, 2 completely different lives. The real Sarah Mitchell died in a car accident at 16. Your wife assumed her identity shortly after. We don't know her real name yet, but facial recognition matched her to a string of insurance scams across the country. She was running cons before she even met you." The room seemed to tilt. Every memory, every moment of their life together took on a sinister new light. Their first meeting at the coffee shop, had it been planned? Their whirlwind romance, had it all been orchestrated? Even Jason's birth. "The DNA test results just came back," Tom said, his voice heavy with the weight of one final revelation. "Jason, he wasn't your biological son." Michael stood abruptly, sending papers scattering across the floor. He made it to the bathroom just in time to be violently sick. When he emerged, pale and shaking, Tom was on the phone, his expression grim. Sarah's plane lands in 2 hours, Tom reported. But there's something else. Remember those offshore accounts where the insurance money went? They're being emptied. All of it, the insurance payout, the stolen client funds, it's all being transferred to a single account. And you'll never guess whose name is on it. Michael looked up, already knowing the answer would destroy whatever remained of his world. It's your mother's maiden name, Tom confirmed. The account was set up 30 years ago. Mike, this isn't just about revenge. This is about your entire family. Sarah didn't just marry you. She married into a multi-generational con. And your mother, she's been part of it from the beginning. Eleanor Davidson's house looked exactly as it had every Sunday for the past 30 years, pristine white columns, meticulously trimmed roses, and the gentle swing of the porch rocker where she'd told Michael bedtime stories as a child. But now, approaching the familiar front door, Michael felt like a stranger in a funhouse mirror version of his memories. Remember, Tom said from the unmarked police car across the street, we're monitoring everything. The moment you feel unsafe. Michael cut him off with a wave. She's my mother, Tom. Whatever else she might be, she's still that. The doorbell chimed the same melody it always had, but today it sounded like a funeral dirge. Eleanor opened the door wearing her signature pearl necklace and a confused smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Michael? Darling, what a surprise. I thought our Sunday dinner wasn't until, she stopped, finally registering his expression. Something flickered across her face, not guilt, not fear, but something more complex. Recognition, perhaps. The look of a chess player realizing the end game had finally arrived. Hello, Mother, Michael said softly. We need to talk about Robert Cohen. The name hung in the air between them like smoke. Eleanor's hand, still resting on the doorframe, trembled slightly. Then, with the grace he'd always admired, she stepped aside. Come in, dear. I've just made tea. The living room was a museum of his childhood, photos of family vacations, his father's old sailing trophies, even the crude pottery he'd made in 3rd grade. But now each item felt like a prop in an elaborate stage play. Your father, Eleanor began, pouring tea with steady hands, was not the man you thought he was. And you're not the woman I thought you were, Michael replied. The offshore account, Mother. 30 years of planning. Why? Eleanor set down the teapot with deliberate care. Your father didn't die of a heart attack in that sailing accident, Michael. He was murdered. By Robert Cohen's son. The room seemed to tilt. What? Marcus Cohen, or Blackwood, as he calls himself now, he blamed your father for his family's ruin. The truth is, your father had discovered something terrible. The Cohens weren't victims, they were running a massive Ponzi scheme. Your father was going to expose them. Michael's head spun. So everything, Sarah, Jason, all of it, was about revenge. Sarah. Eleanor's voice caught. I didn't know about her at first. When she came into your life, I thought it was coincidence. By the time I realized who she really was, you were already married. She was pregnant with Jason. His mother's hands shook as she reached for a small wooden box on the mantel. I've kept evidence, Michael. Everything. Every transaction, every connection, every piece of the puzzle. I thought if I could trace the money, follow their movements, I could protect you. Protect me? Michael's laugh was hollow. My son is dead, Mother. My wife, the woman you knew was a fraud, she killed him. Where was your protection then? Tears slid down Eleanor's cheeks. Jason wasn't supposed to die. Sarah went rogue. She and Marcus, they deviated from the plan. They got greedy. The original plan was to bankrupt you, yes, to make you feel what the Cohens felt. But Jason. She covered her face with trembling hands. My grandson. I never thought. I should have stopped it. Should have told you everything. The offshore account, Michael pressed. Why is everything being transferred there? Because that's where the real evidence is, Eleanor replied, her voice steadying. Every transaction the Cohens ever made. Every crime Sarah and Marcus committed. And something else, something they don't know I have. She pulled a USB drive from the wooden box. Your father didn't just discover their scheme, Michael. He documented everything. The original Cohen conspiracy, the murders, the identities of everyone involved. It's all here. A phone buzzed, Eleanor's. Her face went pale as she read the message. Sarah's landed. She's not alone, Marcus is with her. She looked up at her son, eyes sharp with fear and determination. They're not coming for the money, Michael. They're coming for this drive. And they'll kill anyone who stands in their way. Michael's own phone lit up with a text from Detective Chen, multiple armed suspects approaching your mother's house. Get out now. But Eleanor was already moving, hitting a hidden panel behind the mantel. A concealed door swung open, revealing a narrow staircase. Your father's panic room, she explained quickly. There's another exit through the wine cellar. Everything you need to know is on this drive. She pressed the USB into his hand. Go. I'll hold them off. Mother, no. I've lived with this guilt for 30 years, Eleanor cut him off, her voice firm. Let me do this one thing right. Let me protect my son, just once. The sound of breaking glass came from the back of the house. Eleanor shoved Michael toward the hidden door. Run. And Michael? Her voice caught. I love you. Everything I did, right or wrong, was because I love you. The last thing Michael saw before the panel closed was his mother calmly picking up his father's old service revolver from the wooden box, her hands no longer shaking. The sound of the front door bursting open echoed through the walls, followed by Sarah's voice, that once beloved voice, now twisted with malice. Hello, Eleanor. We need to talk about your late husband's files. The wine cellar's emergency exit led Michael to an overgrown path behind the house. As he crouched in the darkness, the muffled sound of voices carried through the ground-level windows. His mother's calm, measured tones. Sarah's sharp demands. Then a single gunshot shattered the night. Michael's body moved before his mind could process, but Tom's iron grip stopped him from rushing back. She made her choice, Tom whispered fiercely, pulling him toward the waiting unmarked car. Honor it. In the car's back seat, Michael's hands trembled as he plugged the USB drive into his laptop. The files were encrypted, but his father's password was one he'd never forget, the latitude and longitude of the spot where they'd scattered his grandfather's ashes. The documents loaded, and suddenly, his father's voice seemed to fill the car through pages of personal journals and recorded video files. My dearest Michael, the first entry began, if you're reading this, then the truth I've feared for so long has finally come to light. The burden I'm about to share has haunted 3 generations of our family. It starts not with Robert Cohen, but with your grandfather. The truth spilled out through decades of detailed records. The Cohens and the Davidsons had been business partners in the 1960s, running an investment firm that specialized in helping Holocaust survivors recover and invest their restitution payments. But Michael's grandfather had discovered something terrible. Robert Cohen wasn't helping these survivors, he was stealing from them, using their trauma to build his fortune. Your grandfather tried to stop it, his father's journal continued. The night he died in that mysterious car accident in 1970, he was on his way to the FBI. Robert Cohen arranged it, but he made one mistake, he confided in his young wife, Eleanor, trying to convince her that her father-in-law's death was necessary to protect their interests. Michael's breath caught. His mother, she'd known everything from the beginning. She'd married his father as part of a long game of revenge against the Cohens, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment. Eleanor was 19 when she married me, his father wrote. I thought it was love. It took me 15 years to realize she'd chosen me for my last name, for access to the evidence her father-in-law had collected. But something unexpected happened, she fell in love. With me, with our life, with you. When she finally told me the truth, we made a plan. We would protect you, gather evidence, and bring down the entire Cohen empire legally. A video file came next, dated just days before his father's accident. His father's face filled the screen, older than in Michael's memories, lined with worry. Michael, Marcus Cohen discovered our investigation. If anything happens to me, the evidence is hidden in the place where you first learned to sail. Eleanor knows nothing about this backup, I've kept her in the dark to protect her. She thinks she's the only one documenting their crimes, but I've been building a parallel case. Son, if you're seeing this, it means both Eleanor and I failed to protect you from Sarah. She's Marcus's sister, Michael. The real Sarah Cohen, hidden in plain sight all these years. She was just a child when her father died, raised to believe we destroyed her family. Everything, your marriage, Jason, all of it, was orchestrated as part of their revenge. The video continued, but Michael could barely process the words. Sarah Cohen. His wife of 23 years was Robert Cohen's daughter, Marcus's sister, molded from childhood into a weapon against his family. Another gunshot echoed from the house, followed by silence. Detective Chen's voice crackled over Tom's radio, suspects are mobile. They have Eleanor Davidson. They're heading toward the lakefront. Multiple vehicles. The lakefront. Where Michael had learned to sail. Where his father's final evidence was hidden. They don't know about the video, Michael realized aloud. They think mother has everything, but father left a failsafe. He turned to Tom, a lifetime of confusion crystallizing into clarity. I know where they're going. And I know what they don't know. Tom studied him for a long moment. What's the play? Michael's hand closed around the USB drive, feeling the weight of 3 generations of secrets. They took my son. They've taken my mother. But they've forgotten something important about the Davidsons. His voice hardened with quiet determination. We're not just financial advisors. We're sailors. And that lake? It's been our home for 4 generations. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, bring the drive to Peterson's Marina. Slip 23. 1 hour. Or Eleanor joins your father at the bottom of Lake Michigan. They didn't know that Slip 23 was where it had all begun, where his father had first taught him that the water holds secrets deeper than any grave. And now, after all these years, the lake would finally give up its ghosts. The night air carried the familiar scent of Lake Michigan, algae, diesel, and ancient secrets. Michael stood at the entrance to Peterson's Marina, where wooden planks creaked beneath his feet just as they had in his childhood. Somewhere in the darkness, his mother was paying the price for 30 years of silence, and his wife, Sarah Cohen, was about to face the truth she'd spent a lifetime running from. Detective Chen's team had taken positions around the marina, hidden among the shadows of sailboats and yacht clubs. Tom's voice came soft through Michael's earpiece, you don't have to do this yourself. But he did. Some debts could only be paid in person. As Michael approached Slip 23, memories washed over him like waves, his father teaching him to tie knots, weekend sailing trips, Jason's first time at the helm. Jason, who had never really been his son, but who had loved him with a child's pure, unquestioning heart. Sarah stood at the end of the dock, her silhouette achingly familiar against the starlit water. Marcus loomed beside her, one hand gripping Eleanor's arm. His mother's face was bruised but defiant, her pearl necklace glinting like a battle scar. The drive, Marcus called out. Show it to us. Michael held up the USB drive, letting it catch the light from the marina's lamps. Let her go first. Sarah's laugh was bitter. You still don't understand, do you? Still trying to negotiate like this is one of your business deals. She stepped forward, and in the harsh dock lighting, Michael saw something in her eyes he'd never noticed before, a deep, consuming pain that mirrored his own. Do you know what it's like to grow up knowing your father died because of someone else's righteous crusade? To spend every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone without him? I do now, Michael replied quietly. Thanks to you. Sarah flinched as if struck. Jason wasn't supposed to. Don't say his name. The words came out like ice. You don't have the right. Not anymore. The drive, Marcus interrupted, tightening his grip on Eleanor. Now. Michael took another step forward. You want the truth so badly. Here it is, your father wasn't a victim, Marcus. He was stealing from Holocaust survivors. My grandfather discovered it, and your father had him killed. Everything you think you're avenging, it's all built on lies. You're lying, Sarah whispered, but doubt had crept into her voice. The evidence is all here, Michael held up the drive. Plus what Dad hid in his old mooring, the one you never knew about. The one right below us. Marcus's eyes widened. What mooring? The sound of police boats approaching cut through the night. Marcus shoved Eleanor aside, reaching for something in his jacket. The gunshot exploded across the water, but Eleanor was faster, decades of carrying guilt had prepared her for this moment. She threw herself at Marcus, sending them both crashing into the lake. Sarah screamed, starting forward, but Michael was already diving in. The dark water closed over his head as he searched for his mother. His hand found fabric, Eleanor's sweater, and he pulled her toward the surface. Police spotlights suddenly illuminated the water, revealing Marcus thrashing nearby. Help him. Sarah's voice carried across the water. Please. He's my brother. But Marcus was beyond help. As the police boats converged, he looked at Sarah one last time. I'm sorry, he gasped. Father would have hated what we've become. Then he slipped beneath the surface, choosing the lake's depths over capture. Later, wrapped in emergency blankets on the dock, Michael watched as Detective Chen led Sarah away in handcuffs. She looked back once, her face a map of regret and unspoken words. Eleanor touched his hand. I found something in the panic room, she said softly. After you left. She pressed a worn envelope into his palm. Jason wrote it, a week before. He must have suspected something. With trembling fingers, Michael opened his son's last letter. Dad, because that's who you'll always be to me. I found Mom's real birth certificate. I know the truth about who she is, about the Coens. But I want you to know, the love was real. Maybe not hers, but mine was. Every moment. You taught me that family isn't about blood, it's about choice. And I chose you. Love, Jason. Tears mixed with lake water on Michael's cheeks. Eleanor wrapped her arms around him, and together they watched the sun rise over Lake Michigan. The water lapped at the dock, eternal and unchanging, carrying away old secrets and washing clean the sins of 3 generations. What do we do now? Eleanor whispered. Michael thought of Jason's words. About choice. About love. About the family we choose rather than the one we're born into. We heal, he said finally. We tell the truth. We honor Jason's memory by choosing to be better than our past. As if in answer, a gentle breeze carried the sound of distant sailboat halyards clinking against their masts, the same sound that had lulled him to sleep as a child, that had comforted Jason on their summer trips, that would continue long after their story faded into marina legend. The weight of water, like the weight of truth, could pull you under or lift you up. The choice, as Jason had understood, was always yours to make.